All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are about to start now, so we can actually get going. Once again, I would like to thank all of those who've actually attended this session. Sadly enough, this will be the last session on the RDM mini-series. It's been a pleasure to actually host these for you, and I hope that you've actually managed to get maximum benefit by coming to these sessions. This session actually represents a culmination of all the previous sessions, and it will actually include a hands-on component. So if there's anyone who's actually missed any of the previous sessions, you just have to tag along, so to speak, because there'll be a lot that you might not actually understand, having not had the benefit of being at, having attended the previous sessions. So the first thing that we're going to do before we dive into how to use the institutional research data repository is, as you know, I'd like to go through a quick recap of what research data management actually is by going through the basic RDM concepts. First things first, what are research data? In this case, we've defined research data as any data collected or generated for the purpose of analysis in order to generate or validate scientific claims. And on your screen, you can actually see the different types or at least forms that research data can actually take. Then we've proceeded to actually define research data management. In this case, we defined research data management as a process that entailed two things. Firstly, planning for the manner in which research data would be managed during and after a research project, that is the data management planning phase. And secondly, controlling the collection, processing, analysis, sharing, dissemination, curation, and reuse of research data. And what I indicated was that this definition is actually derived directly from the research data management lifecycle, which has 6 stages. And each of these stages does actually have its own underlying subcomponents, so to speak. Now, today's session actually focuses on a certain component and not the entire lifecycle, which I'll showcase now in the next coming slides. But before that, what I wanted to mention is that you can actually view this lifecycle in tabular form. So if you were to do that, this is what the lifecycle ends up looking like. And our focus today would be on the data publication aspect, the data documentation aspect, as well as legal and ethical compliance if you look at the dissemination stage, which deals with the sharing, the publication of research data. The focus of this session will also look at things such as submission of resource data for publication purposes, the appraisal and selection of the data, the metadata enrichment, and accessibility of the resource data. Now, everything that I've just showed on under the data curation column really relates to what a data curator would be doing rather than a researcher, with the exception of the metadata enrichment component. Now, most of this will actually then make more sense as we actually proceed throughout the rest of this session. Now, before we jump into the session, let's just go through a bit of a recap of data publication, which is what we actually covered yesterday. So yesterday's session was a bit of a deep dive into data publication, and we went through the different types of methods through which research data can actually be published. Firstly, I indicated that research data can be published as supplementary data, which actually accompany a journal article. Secondly, indicated that research data can be uploaded onto a generic or even a domain-specific research data repository. Thirdly, we found out that research data can also be published separately as standalone data journals, and these are rather as standalone data papers, and these data papers are actually published in data journals. The fourth thing, which is really a subcomponent of the generic research data repository that's under category 2, is the institutional research data repository. And what I pointed out is that Rose University has its own institutional research data repository. And I did also explain that we would actually go into that deep dive of this repository today. And if you wanted to view this visually, this is what you would actually see. On the left-hand side, you'll see the traditional publication model, which has scholarly papers that were published with no specific journal articles, supplementary data. Whereas if you go onto the left-hand side, you see that you have journal articles that are published along with supplementary data. These are actually hosted by journal publishers. Secondly, you can find that someone takes their research, their data paper, and they publish it into a data journal. And the third option is to go on the right-hand side is to deposit the data into a data repository, which could be a domain-specific one that is specific to a certain academic discipline. So if it's genetics, for instance, you'd have GenBank, which is specifically for genetics-based research. Or you can go to something called Dryad. Dryad is a multidisciplinary data repository, which takes research data from multiple disciplines. And our very own institutional research data repository here is a subspecies of the multidisciplinary research data repository in the sense that we actually accept research data from all the academic faculties here. And we can link out to all of these other sources as well. So even if researchers opt to actually publish their data through other avenues, other third-party avenues, we can simply create links. And although we wouldn't host the research data ourselves, you can actually find them on the data repository. But if you click the link, you'll be redirected to wherever the data sets are actually hosted. So in short, there's no way one can really run away from us. And that is what the interface actually looks like if you actually wanted to use the Rhodes University's Institutional Research Data Repository. Now, what we went through yesterday, in addition to learning more about data publication, was the checklist, because you don't just take your data sets and sort of like just upload them into a data repository. You should actually have a checklist to make sure that your research data meet a certain standard. And it helps actually go through this checklist before the research data sets are actually published. So firstly, we say that you should actually have a look at the quality of the data sets themselves, make sure that there are no errors that the research data actually contain, so that they can actually truly support the journal article or the research output that they actually underpin. Secondly, one has to actually look at the file format. And this is something that I went into detail about during the very first session that we covered a few weeks ago. So you'd actually want to make use of open, non-proprietary, lossless, standard file formats. And for any given type of data, there are certain acceptable file formats. You have the recommended ones, and then you have acceptable ones. Thirdly, there's an organization, that is the manner in which the files themselves are actually placed inside folders or subfolders, that is directories and subdirectories. You also want to look at the actual file naming convention that you would actually use for your specific individual files. Remember, you want to make sure that people who use the research data in the future can actually understand your research data. Fourthly, there's the issue of data documentation. These are supplementary files that actually provide more context about your research data. In the absence of data documentation, it is extremely difficult for someone to actually understand the nature of your research data, unless you probably have some kind of data paper that actually exists, which goes into great detail describing your research data. If someone can get hold of your data paper and they find a data file, then perhaps they'll actually understand it. But if you're depositing your data into a repository, you would not actually have a data paper that accompanies the files. You would actually have some form of data documentation. The fifth thing is the metadata. So as you actually submit your data to a repository, you will actually complete some electronic form that prompts you to actually provide certain information that is metadata, data that describes data. So it could be something like the name, that is the creator of the file, the title of the data set, when the data were collected. But you see that you will be guided by the actual form. And during today's session, you will actually see the specific metadata elements that you'd actually have to complete. I did showcase these fields yesterday, but today you'll see for yourselves. Then the sixth element is sensitive data. You need to make sure that you screen the data for sensitivity. So that would be elements related to data privacy, it could be intellectual property concerns, research contracts. We went through about 6 things yesterday due to which research data can be deemed to be sensitive. You want to make sure that your research data are not sensitive before they are actually published. The data will be appraised by a data curator. However, since they're not well versed in the detailed aspects about your research data, you happen to know more about your research data than other people, there's a chance that if there's some sensitive data, it might not be picked up by someone else. The number 7, intellectual property. to a certain degree, especially if you look at the patent's aspect, that could be ground for sensitivity. However, I've put this here as a standalone element because in this case, you'll be looking at things such as copyrights, yes, patents, as well as industrial designs, licensing, which really have, and those are things that don't have anything to do with sensitivity of research data, with the exception of the patents. And then finally, we have the data citations. Now, what I did point out yesterday is that if you're making use of a repository such as our institution's own data repository, the citation would actually be automatically generated on your behalf. But should someone ask you for it, for instance, or if you are asked you for the citation, you should actually be able to pull the citation and send it to them. So it actually helps to know how the system works, so you can actually derive or extract that data citation. And with that out of the way, I think that we can delve into the different components of a data repository. Just a small thing there. This is just to help you actually understand how the system works. So a data repository, or at least rather a repository in the general sense, is defined by the Research Data Alliance as a searchable and queryable interfacing entity that is able to store, manage, maintain, and curate data or digital objects. So the sole purpose of a repository is not necessarily to manage research data. You can use it for other types of research outputs. So this is a standard definition that can apply to repositories for outputs such as theses, dissertations, journal articles, as well as research data sets. And here's another definition which defines a repository as any computer system whose primary function is to store digital material for use in a library. Now, most repositories are straightforward computer systems that store information in a file system or database and present it to the world through a well-defined interface. So what I want you to gather from this is that there's a database that runs in the back end, so to speak, where the data or content is actually stored. But on the front end, you'll actually be interacting with some kind of interface that can actually be queried or searched. You can use it in order to search or browse for content. So schematically, it looks something like this. You have the repository with the content database, and then you have the data that are actually stored in the system. In our case, we make use of AWS, Amazon, in order to actually store the data. And then you have the interfaces. So there are two sides of this. On the one side, you've got the administrative interface, that's the back end. End users will not actually be able to see this. In that case, your administrators will then be able to manage the collection. They can see the collaborative spaces. They can see the individual files, the users on the system. That's really for administrative purposes. But from your side, as an end user, you would deal with the user interfaces. And in this case, there's an information retrieval interface. So if you are actually just searching for research data, let's say you're a member of the public and you weren't necessarily at Rhodes University, you'll still be able to browse and search for data sets that have been published on our institution's repository. However, you would not be able to access the user accounts. The user accounts can be accessed by Rhodes University staff members and students. And those staff members and students can also access the information retrieval interface. So by using the user accounts, you actually get to access your individual files. There's a collaborative space there. And you obviously can access, you can have a look at individual folders. The folders go within the files, obviously. And you can also have a look at the activities taking place within your accounts, if there's any activity at all. Now, physically, this is what you'd actually see. The interface looks like this, and there are at least 4 data sets that you see on the screen in front of you. These are the most recent data sets that have actually been published. So if we were to proceed and actually publish something today, it would actually show up as the latest published data set, and it would actually be on the left-hand side of the screen. Now, from the user interface, this is what you see. So this is an example of my account. I've only put 3 files into my account. So this gives you an idea of what you'd actually be able to see. You can see draft documents. You can see that people can actually edit the documents. You see the name of the author or the creator of the data sets, the names of the files in question as well. Now, before we proceed, I think that it's good to actually give you a better idea of how the system works by showing you a video that was actually published by a company known as Figshare. So our university's repository is a Figshare-powered repository. So Figshare is a company that actually designed or developed the software, and they provide the software for several institutions. So this is known as Figshare for institutions, and our university subscribes to that. So there's a demonstration video, a very short 3-minute long video that they've actually put out, and I think it can give you a good idea about how this repository actually works. Now let's just play this video. We just did a sound test on this, and it did work. I think we just need to mute this.
Researchers are passionate about the research they do. Researchers are passionate about the research they do. They put a huge amount of effort into their research and should get credit for all outputs, from data to null results. Data is increasingly being recognized as a first-class research object, so sharing the data that underlies the findings of a traditional research article can make research easier to reproduce and can unlock new avenues of inquiry. Making data open, accessible, and persistent also complies with many funder mandates. Research data managers and librarians should be able to easily manage all research outputs at their institution, from open access publications to research data. Figshare for Institutions is a place for researchers to get credit for all their research outputs, from papers to data, while giving research data managers control over their institution's research outputs. Figshare's all-in-one repository continues to cater to the needs of a data repository by making data citable, shareable, discoverable, and fair. You can upload any file type into your Figshare for Institutions repository and preview over 1,200 file types in the browser for maximum engagement and impact. Data on Figshare is given a citable DOI, thorough metadata, and a reuse license. Once published, content is marked for indexing in Google, Google Scholar, Google Dataset Search, and other search engines. Users can track the views, downloads, citations, and alt metrics of their data for measuring impact. With Figshare's new all-in-one repository functionality, papers can be uploaded into your Figshare repository alongside the data, providing a holistic representation of your institution's research outputs, where you can showcase your papers with handle minting, cover sheets for PDFs, custom item types, and a full publication timeline on the item pages. Researchers can collaborate on ongoing research with colleagues at other institutions with projects and can group data together into a collection. Administrators can manage their institution's users, groups, and storage. They can also create custom metadata fields for items, projects, and collections. Reviewers can approve or reject items before they become publicly available, editing items that come into the review pool easily and quickly. Reporters can keep track of usage statistics using a fully customizable dashboard with exportable reports. Reports include, but are not limited to, views, downloads, storage used, top viewed items, and more. Research management is done via a customizable portal that is easily integrated with your organization's existing systems. A dedicated support team is on hand to answer your questions. You'll also receive one-on-one support throughout the implementation process. Additionally, we offer a range of engagement support once you've implemented Figshare, from personalized demos just for your researchers to co-branded materials for campus events. Join our community of users to share ideas, spread best practice knowledge, and discuss future developments at Figshare, along with all our existing institutional customers. The new all-in-one Figshare repository for papers and data.
So now that we're done with that demo video, we can actually just go into a few things that we will cover today. So there's a practical component of this session. And what I'll do is just show you that when you use this repository, you can actually create a user profile. Obviously, once you've logged in, your credentials are actually stored in the system, but you can still populate your your user profile. In addition to that, you can also link your user account with the org ID if you have one. So this is not something that is done automatically, and I'll show you how this works. Then there's also a section known as items. So this allows you to actually do certain things. So you can perform certain tasks such as uploading single files. You can edit the single files, delete the single files. You can upload multiple files. You can edit batch files. You can also publish files so that as you actually submit your research data for publication. And you can also reserve DOIs. You can place embargoes on your files, or you can actually create private links. Now, I'm not going to show you all of these things. I'll have to be a bit selective in this case, because there's also another section known as collections, which allows you to create what is known as collections. These are essentially folders, and you can actually create subfolders within the collections. But even under items, you can actually create, you can actually upload files in batch. But a collection allows you to pull in multiple files from your items section, but it also allows you to pull in data sets that have been published by other people. So from the user interface, if the data sets have already been published, you can actually pull them in case you actually want to work with them in your own user account. We won't be going through the collection section today due to time constraints, but you can also publish a collection. So what I would like to do now is just go through a practical exercise. I did ask Toby to share a link to the repository. And if you can just click on that link, that will take you to the repository, because in order for you to actually follow, you actually have to access your user account. I just want to check if everyone has access to that link. If you can just click it and then log in. It's going to be slightly tricky for those who are actually attending virtually, because I can't actually see what's on your screen at the moment, as well as any problems you might be facing. So what I'll do is I will just sort of, I will go into my account and then have you follow me and what I'm doing. So I'd like for you to actually at least create, to go in and create a project. Can you just indicate if you've managed to log in? You're logged in. All right, so I'm going to go into my content. All right, so we're going to go to items. And then you'll see a drop-down arrow there that has items, collections, and there's a project section as well. So I'd like for you to click on the projects icon. Now, what you should do is then go to create new. All right, so what you'll see is that once you've clicked on that, there's a electronic form that actually opens up. Now, you should just put in your name. So you can put in your first name. So if this was me, you just put in first name and then RU data repository. Right, how to use the institutional research data repository. So just your name, RU data repository, and then something like this, how to use the institutional research data repository. And then what you can do is to put, you can select individual project there. Which is the default setting. And then after that, you save the changes. So I've done that, and you can see this is the project right here. Are we all done with that step? All right, then I would like for you to go and click on the invite button right there. And then you'll see an electronic form that shows up. And I'd like for you to actually type in my name. So you type in my name, and it's Marco. So make sure it's Samuel Simango at Rose University, and then click it. So you type in Samuel Simango. Unfortunately, I can't actually invite myself in this case. I will just use my colleagues' details here. So I will invite Tobile, for instance. Once I type in the name, the email address automatically shows up. But in that case, you should put my details, Samuel Simango, and then select collaborator as opposed to viewer so that I can at least make comments, things of that sort. And then after that, you go to send one invite. And then the invitation will be sent. Have you done that so far? All right, so what I'll do is I'll refresh this. And I have 3 notifications so far. Let's see what's going on here. All right, so I've basically been invited to actually join these projects. So I can sort of like select which ones I want to join. And now that the projects have actually been created, what we would have normally done in this case is I would have actually just shared a document with you. But we saw what I did is I emailed everyone beforehand, before the session, and I realized that not everyone had actually registered with their Rose University email addresses. And that would be a bit of a problem because in order for you to actually authenticate with our institutional data repository, you actually have to use your Rose University email address. So what we would do is we would actually work with a certain research data set. And that is something that I would have wanted to actually share. So provided that I can actually accept the invitation and join the actual project, I should be able to edit anything that you've actually uploaded. But let's just see. All right, what I should point out is that the project setting might allow you to actually make comments to a file. However, this is not necessarily a file that you've actually uploaded. So this would be something that has actually been uploaded by whoever invited you. So what I'll do is for everyone who's actually in the session right now is I will email you a data set. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. And this is a data set that you can actually then proceed to upload. Well, we can actually do that as well. Let me just grab that. Just give me a second. Right. All right, so I've just uploaded the dataset file. Can you all see it? If you'd be so kind as to download that, I'm going to share my screen once again. So that is the dataset file that has actually been shared. All right, so what I'd like for you to do now is to upload that data set. And what you will be doing is you will be completing the metadata records for that data set. So just by way of indication, this is going to look something like this. So before you upload anything, you will need to select a group. In this case, I'd like for you to select your respective academic faculty in that case. I will select library because that's what I'm associated with as an entity of the institution. And then you would have to choose, select a certain type. Any guesses about what kind of type we would actually want to select? There are several options here. You've got figures, you've got media, data set, posters, journal contribution, etc. I'm not going to spoon feed you, but you can pick one of those. And then you'll proceed to actually browse, or you can drag or drop the item. So it's fairly intuitive and easy to use. So in this case, you'll see a person can just, they can grab the file and then they can drag and drop it. So you drag and drop it, and that will be it. Just remember that you've selected the right type as well. And then after that, you click on Continue to Metadata. See, the file has actually been uploaded. And then all you have to do is to proceed to complete the rest of the information there. So what you need to do in order to complete that information is you actually need to have a look at the data set. And you can use that data set in order to complete the metadata record. So I'm going to give you at least 5 minutes. This shouldn't take too long. 5 minutes of your time for you to actually complete the metadata record based on the data set that we can actually see here. And then after 5 minutes, we'll go through it. So I've got a timer here and I'm just going to set it so I can start counting down now. I'm going to do that in 3, 2, 1, go. So there are no hands or thumbs ups going up, so I will assume that everyone is actually done. However, we could do even better. In this case, we can just go into the projects and actually have a look at what people have actually been working on. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll go to the projects into which I was actually invited. So let's just pick here. So there are only 3 or 4 people who actually created projects. So again, people, I don't see the groups that have actually been, the projects that have been created. Because it's hands-on session, you may have actually missed out then on what should have actually happened in terms of the steps that you would have actually taken to actually load a data set. So let's have a look at what Samantha actually uploaded. There is the data set that Samantha uploaded. And the information that's there is that this is a change in weather pattern over a 5-day period. And you can see the data set right over there. And that's something that can be published. But in addition to that, you can actually have a look at the metadata. So in terms of the categories, Samantha selected meteorology as well as environmental geography. And in terms of keywords, there was hashtag weather as well as hashtag meteorological observations. And the license that was selected was a Creative Commons attribution license. So definitely the right license was actually selected. The categories, meteorology is the perfect one. Environmental geography could also be construed as being correct. The keywords, the hashtags don't necessarily have to be present, but the term weather as well as meteorological observations would definitely be accurate in that case. But you'll see perhaps that the title of the data set might be problematic for reasons that I will actually explain. But I also just want to have a look at what was created by, in this case, let's see, other data sets that were actually created. Let me leave this project first, leave project. So I'll be going back to my account to actually see projects that I was invited to join. So there's one by Spunkula in this case. And we can have a look at that account. We can actually see the data set itself. Well, there's no item that was actually deposited by Spunkula in this case, so we can't actually check anything. Let's have a look at perhaps one more in this case. There's Ayanda who has another project there. Let me just scroll up and then I will go into the project section. And well, there's only one more project created by Sue in this case. So let us have a look at that. No items have been deposited. So the idea is that the file should have actually been uploaded. So what I'll do now is I will actually walk you through the project so that, and firstly, what I didn't mention deliberately is that this exercise was rigged with a couple of booby traps. The idea was to pick up from what we actually went through yesterday, which is basically, and I did allude to it earlier on today, is that when you are actually proceeding to publish your data or prepare your data for publication, you need to go through a checklist, remember? And in terms of that checklist, you want to look at the quality or check the resource data in question. You want to have a look at the file formats. Organize the files. Now, in this case, there was only one file, so this one wouldn't be a problem as such. There needs to be some kind of data documentation. Remember, the supplementary files that accompany the data files. In this case, there was only one file, so there was no data documentation that was actually present. Then the metadata is what would be completed in the electronic record. We had to look at what Samantha completed. She actually added the metadata. For the most part, that was accurate metadata. There was the issue of the sensitivity of the data. Given that this was a data set relating to weather observations, I'm not sure if anyone would actually classify this as sensitive data. Certainly not. There's nothing from an intellectual property standpoint. I mean, other than that, it's the university's it's data that belongs to the university from a copyright standpoint, but there's nothing sensitive from an ethics or data privacy standpoint, from a patent standpoint, from a research contract standpoint. It's not there. As I've pointed out, nothing from an IP standpoint. And the data citation aspect is something that we actually extract from the system itself. So let's go into a bit of a deeper dive into the actual individual data file. So if you have a look at this data file, you will observe a number of things. I don't know if anyone noticed any anomalies. Perhaps I can just ask the group, are there any anomalies that you actually spotted when you actually had a look at this data set? There are no prizes that I'm handing out, but it would be interesting to see if anyone can spot. They're fairly obvious, or at least I tried to make them fairly obvious. remember what I stated in the data sharing example, the data sharing file example, where you had files that actually had errors and they were published and the results had impacts in the future? Aha. Sam has actually pointed it out, my namesake, 258 degrees. We would fire. Mind you, the data in question were actually collected last week. Or at least I didn't actually give you a time frame, by the way, but maybe I should have mentioned that. The data were collected last week from Monday to Friday. But even if I didn't mention this, this is 200 degrees. The unit of measurement has not been mentioned. So it could be Celsius, it could be in Fahrenheit, or it could be in Kelvin. It really doesn't matter. If it's at 200, that is scorching hot. You know, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. We would fry it. This would be record breaking. The whole world would know about it. So you can clearly deduce that this is actually false. And the forecast states that it was mostly sunny. It will be weird to have 258 degrees. Now, the context that I didn't tell you, and this was on purpose, if you found this as a data set, you'd actually have a lot of questions. When were the data collected? Where were the data actually collected? So I'm giving you that context, which would actually be in your data documentation. The data were collected at the Rose University Library from the 16th to the 20th of March, 2026. So this would mean that on Thursday last week, it was 258 degrees. We wouldn't be here, obviously. So most likely, that would actually have to be 25.8 degrees Celsius. In addition to, so that's for the air temperature. You'd actually want to see what unit of measurement that is. For the forecast, there's nothing wrong there. For the wind speed, you have to wonder, what is the unit of measurement? Is that in miles per hour or is that kilometers per hour? The hint is the fact that the data were collected in South Africa. So we actually use kilometers per hour as a unit of measurement in that case, as opposed to miles per hour. If you looked at the time, there's nothing really wrong there. However, it would probably be more appropriate to actually indicate that the time in this case is based on South African Standard Time. And these are things that should be in the data set, but more appropriately, they should also be in the data documentation. And there's nothing really that needs to be changed when it comes to the dates. So I will then show you the correct version of the data set. But before we do that, there's something that we forgot. How many of you actually looked at the file format? Did you notice that this was a Microsoft Excel document? The proprietary file format, the one that is not really acceptable? As I indicated, you have to use open file formats. So ideally, you'd actually want to use a CSV file, that is a comma separated value file, instead of a Microsoft Excel one. So the correct version of this document should look something like this. It should indicate that this is actually a CSV file, comma separated value file. And then I'm going to open that document. And then just do a bit of tweak in there. Add the delimiter. And there we have it. The date, the time, South African Standard Time, kilometers per hour for the wind speed, the air temperature in Celsius. That's what you would actually have. But now, perhaps more importantly, you would also have the README file. But before you even go to the README file, just the file name. The file name that I sent you was dataset1, not the most descriptive file name ever. You should actually have a file name that looks like this: Weather Observations, Rose University Library. See, in version 5. So it may not be the final version of the dataset. Immediately, you can actually determine that this file deals with weather observations. The data were collected at Rose University's library. Perhaps not that you can't tell anything about the dates, etc. However, if you actually open the README file associated with this project, you can actually see the title of the dataset is Weather Observations, Rose University Library. The investigation was conducted by someone whose name is someone. This is fictitious. At Rose University, you've got Rose's address, you've got the fictitious email address, you've got the date range now. the 16th of March until the 20th of March, 2026, the data were collected in Makanda in the Eastern Cape. The research was funded by the Fictitious Research Foundation, the FRF. Then I didn't complete everything that you need to see about this data, but I did indicate that a Creative Commons attribution license would be used. That was the license that was also correctly selected by Samantha. And then in terms of the data file overview, I provided a short description saying that these are weather observations collected at the library on March 2026. I didn't complete each and every single thing though. I skipped the methodological information. You could fill this in, obviously, if you were working with a real data set. In fact, you'd be encouraged to do so. And I mentioned the number of variables. There are 25. There are at least 5 rows, given that this is a tabular data set. In terms of the variable list, I provided a bit more context. So I did indicate that the time is expressed in South African Standard Time. The dates, those are specific dates of the month. In terms of the wind speed, I did mention that this is expressed in the form of kilometers per hour, and that the forecast is really a general weather pattern. In addition to that, for the for the temperature, I mentioned that that is measured in degrees Celsius. So this is a kind of information that you find in data documentation. As I pointed out to you, data documentation provides more context about the research data files, and you can find far more sophisticated data sets out there. But just have a look at the kind of difference that this data documentation, the README file, how much context is added to this simple data file. Now, what if you're working with multiple files or a far more complex data file that had no data documentation at all? It will be a bit difficult for you to actually comprehend the nature of the data set. So what we'll do now is we will take this data file, or at least both the README file and the spreadsheet, and we will actually upload them. I must apologize that we're actually going beyond time, but for maximum benefit, it would make sense for me to actually upload these things so that you can actually get to see how the whole process actually unfolds. I hope that is perfectly fine with you, and that no one had any appointments at 3:30. We will definitely be done by 4 o'clock though. So what I'll do is I'll go back to now in my individual file. I'll go to items. And then I will create this data set from scratch. So I'll select my group, that is library. You would select the group that is most relevant to you. In my example, remember I selected media? That was to throw people off. Really, it's supposed to be a data set in this case. And then what I'll do is I will drag and drop the files in question. So that is the spreadsheet and the README file. Now you'll see that there's a template there. This is a template that can be shared, so you can definitely make use of this template for yourselves. So I'm going to now continue to the metadata. And I will just add the name there, that is Weather Observations, Rhodes University Library. And then in terms of categories, I am just going to select meteorology. What Samantha selected was definitely also correct, but I'm just leaving it like this. Keywords, I would just select climate, weather, and I'll leave it like that. But with the keywords, you'll notice that you can select whatever you want, but you don't need to add hashtag, the hash to it. You just type in the keyword and then you press enter. Whereas when it comes to categories, these are actually predefined in terms of what we call controlled vocabulary. So if you see, if I select there, there's a list that you can select from. And these items also have subcategories. So if you go under agricultural, veterinary, and food sciences, you find that there are far more options that you can actually select. And you can actually you can search and manually select, or you can just start typing, and then the system will actually guess what you're actually trying to select. But just keep in mind that categories is more limited than keywords. Now, what this means is that for keywords, someone can actually select the wrong keyword, or they can actually spell the keyword incorrectly. So from the library side, what we do is we check the keywords just to make sure that if they're accurate or that they've been spelled correctly. For the funder, I indicated that this is funded by the Fictitious Research Foundation, the FRF. This institute does not exist. I just made up the name today. It would be very interesting to see if it does exist, though. And then there are no related materials in this case. So if, for instance, there was some kind of journal article that was published and that this data set was associated with a journal article, what you would do is you would add the link to that article, you'd add the title of the article, and you would indicate what type of link you added. Is that a handle or DOI? Most likely, if it's published with the journal nowadays, that would be a DOI, digital object identifier. And then you would select the relationship type. In this case, a data set would actually be something that is either a supplement. So in this case, this would be a supplement of the journal article. Or so you would try to find that specific option if it's there. Or you can say it supports the data set, or rather, in this case, yes, it's a supplement to. So the data set would be a supplement to the journal article. Now, if you make a mistake here, that would be picked up by the data curators here at the library. So we would actually just make sure that that is the right relationship. If it's a journal article, it would have to be a supplement to. If it's a thesis, then it could also be something that it supports it or it's part of. But we know those controlled terms in this case, so you shouldn't worry too much about that. If we have a README file, for instance, that indicates that there's an associated paper, then what we'll do is we'll have a look at the details there to make sure that we add it ourselves, whilst consulting with you as a academic. But if it's a student's, for instance, then we would know that it has to be a dissertation or thesis. This information would have to be completed. And for the licenses, we have several options there, and the right one would be the Creative Commons Attribution License. What I'll then do is proceed to publish, and you do that by going to Submit for Review. And then the item will actually be published. Interesting enough, it says that this file could not be uploaded. Try uploading again. Okay. That's interesting. Let's just try that one more time. So the problem with my actual data set. I'm going to refresh this page now to see if that's actually worked out. Now, I should indicate that I'm not going to proceed to publish the data set immediately. And the reason for this is because I want to also show you the other interesting features, such as the embargo setting, as well as the private link setting. Let's see. All right, so this has been successfully loaded. So I just want to show you that firstly, I indicated that you can reserve a DOI. This is important if you're actually publishing in a journal article. So what you can do is you can reserve for a digital object identifier. It's not mandatory. When the data set is published, a DOI is automatically generated anyway. But sometimes peer reviewers actually ask for a DOI in advance. And if your data set has not been published, and generally some institutions undertake to only publish a data set after a peer reviewer has actually accepted a certain journal article. There's a chicken and egg situation here, simply because you don't want to publish a data set prematurely, because it means that people will actually be able to use it. But if the journal that if the paper that has been submitted is actually declined, if someone needs to make certain changes, you don't want the data set to be floating out there on the internet being used by some people and being cited. So ideally, you want them to be published simultaneously, or insofar as that's actually possible. So soon after you receive information as a researcher that your paper will be published, you notify the library, then we'll publish the data set. But since that's not always possible, what we do is we would reserve the DOI, send it to the publisher so that they have proof that the data set is hosted in a medium that has the ability of generating a DOI and that the DOI has been reserved. So you'd click that, select reserve, and then the DOI is generated right there, and you simply copy that DOI right here. You copy that, and it's a link, and that link can be sent to a publisher or peer reviewer in this case, and they will be able to have a look at the data set itself. The second thing I want to show you then has to do with sharing things with a private link. Now, this also applies to the peer review process. What you do is you simply go to share private link, and the private link is a temporary link. It persists for about 3 years, as far as I understand, unless things have actually changed. You can see the dates here. Oh, it's probably longer. It says that you can select a new link by using the calendar, etc. What you do is you copy that link and you send it to whoever you'd want to make use of this link. So that could be a peer reviewer, and that allows them, because remember, you have to be a Rose University staff member or researcher to access this repository. So how can a peer reviewer get access to your account? By way of a private link. So this indicates that this is what they'll see, that the item has actually been shared with them privately. However, the peer reviewer would actually be able to see the README file as well as the data set. So they'd be able to access this. They can review your journal article as well as your research data, even though you don't have a DOI. And maybe they make the decision saying, we will actually approve this publication. When the publication is published, it will be assigned a DOI by our repository. But there are some reviewers who, even after seeing this, will say, well, this is a private file. How do I know that it will have a DOI? And you can't go and just say, oh, it's in a repository. Isn't it obvious? Well, in that case, that's where that DOI reservation mechanism comes into play. In that case, you'll take that DOI and you'll send it to them. However, that DOI is actually not active, meaning that if someone clicks it, it will not take them to the data set like this. That only happens with a private link. The DOI only becomes active once we've actually published the data set in the repository. So I'm going to close this here. And then the last thing that I want to show you before we publish the data set is adding embargoes. If you're working with some data set that is associated with your thesis or dissertation, and you don't want to publish the thesis itself, and you want to place it under embargo, for instance, you want to generate 1 paper or maybe 2 papers out of the research output that is your thesis or dissertation, you might ask for it to be placed under embargo for 2 or 3 years. And that is perfectly fine in terms of the university's rules. So if the thesis is under embargo, the data set cannot actually be published as well. It might disclose quite a bit as well. So you want to align the embargo dates in this case. So what you do is you'd actually select the time period, maybe 1 or 2 years, or you can actually select the dates manually here. Let's just say you select 2029, 1st of February, for instance. That is also possible. You then also have to select whether you want the files to be placed under embargo along with the metadata, or if it's just the files, meaning that the metadata, the description will be visible. However, the files won't be. And if someone really needs to get hold of the data, they probably have to contact you, or if you've left as a student, they can contact your academic supervisor. So the reasons for the embargo then actually have to be added here. They may or may not be justifiable. So there has to be a reason for the embargo. And then you place the title of the file that is actually under embargo. So in this case, you could put not spreadsheet 1, but you'll put weather observations, Rose University Library. But the README file might not be sensitive. So you might actually publish the README file and not necessarily the sensitive research data. It really does depend. And then you select add embargo. Now, if those are, you might be concerned because you're working with some kind of sensitive data, you can feel free to contact the library in case you need further advice in terms of how that embargo setup or mechanism actually works. What I should point out before I go on to publish the data set is that there's a timer that is set. So if you place your data under embargo for 2 years, there's a timer that actually counts down. And after the 2 years is up, the data set will be automatically published. The library staff will not receive some kind of email prompting them to have a look at the data set and check with the researcher to see if they, or student to see if they still want the item to be under embargo. And mind you, there may be several data sets that we actually have on the system. So as soon as the 2-year period is up, then the embargo lapses, the system automatically publishes the data set. So the onus is then on the researcher or student to keep track of that time period if the student wants an extension to that embargo. I'm just going to preview the data set so you can see what it would look like before it is actually published. This is what it actually looks like once it's actually loaded. Yeah. What I'll do now is I will proceed to publish the data set. So in order to publish the data set, what you do is you submit the item for review. So data sets are not automatically published. They actually have to be reviewed. There is something that is actually missing. Oh, the title. This must have actually changed when I refreshed the page. Weather observations, Rhodes University Library. So I'm going to save the changes, then submit that for review. Oh, there's something else. Oh, I guess when I refresh everything else here changed. All right, so it looks like I'm going to have to add this information again. Meteorology. I'll just add climate, keep it simple. So during 16th to 20th of March, 2026. Now, key thing that I should point out here is that this is a description of the data set. There are people who look at this as an abstract and they copy and paste the abstract for their journal article or their thesis or dissertation. That's not correct. If someone reads this, they'll think that should be a description of the data set. A description of your article cannot really describe your journal, your research data. So if this data set accompanied a scholarly paper, it would be wrong to actually have the abstract placed here. And I won't say that it's deceptive, but think of it this way. The idea is that we want humans as well as software to actually parse these systems. So if software goes through several data sets, hundreds of thousands of them, your data set might not necessarily be picked up simply because the description will be an inaccurate one in that case, or at least the software would be fooled by it. So let's submit this for review. Okay, there's something that has not been picked. What is that? Okay, the item type that's been selected, the group that was selected. Metadata required for publication is missing or filled in incorrectly. Group is fine, data set's fine, my name is fine. Keywords, okay, climate. Okay. Okay, that should be fine. And let's submit that for review. So what indicates is who the reviewers are. So in this case, either Toby or myself will be able to review this data set. And this is will be published under a Creative Commons license. And these are the terms and conditions that you will be, so by selecting submit for review, you'll be agreeing to those terms. And you might want to go and have a look at those terms, but they're quite empty. In the future, what we'll do is we'll change those and customize them so that they can be specific to Rhodes University. But for the purposes of this exercise, we'll presume that the person has read this. And you select submit. Now, what happens is now this will actually be submitted for review. And you can see that the status has actually changed to under review. Now, I'm going to wear two hats in this case. And what I'll do is I will go and I will review this request, and then I will proceed to publish it. Now, because we have other data sets that are currently in the queue, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I will publish the data set, because since this is actually recorded, I don't want to actually share other people's personal information online like that. So let me just minimize that. I'll just talk you through what I'm doing. I've gone into the reviewer queue. And normally what we do is we don't just click publish. What we do is we will appraise the data set. So you'll receive an email from us. We'll tell you exactly what it is that we'll be looking for in the data sets. And after we're done with the appraisal process, then what we do is we email you as a submitter. Only then do we proceed to publish the data sets in question. And I can see here, or perhaps I can share this much. I see that there was a data set that was actually submitted for review by Samantha. That was the first data set. That was quite good. So I'm going to share my screen once again, and then you can see what I can see. So here's what I can see. It's what Samantha submitted over here and what I submitted. So I'm going to publish this one. So I'll select that. And if you wanted to see the citation, which I pointed out previously, you see this red button here with cite. Once you click it, you'll be able to see the citation right there. And you can copy the citation and you can add it to the README file. Or if someone asks for the specific citation, you can send it to them directly. But once this has been published, that button will also be there. So anyone can also obtain that same citation. As I pointed out yesterday, the citation for the data set differs from the citation from a journal article. And in this case, what we want to do is I'll assign it to myself. And then I'll be able to decline or approve this publication. So in this case, what I'll do is I will publish it. So if you had submitted to this to me and I published it or I approved the submission, what would happen is you would receive an email indicating that the data set has actually been published. So if we go to the home page now, what you will see is the most recent, or at least the latest data set has been published by me. There it is right there. I will undertake to delete this after this session is ended because this is not a real data set. It's just a demonstration data set. And you can see that there's a data set that's actually under embargo and it's actually counting down. It's 2 months and 23 days left before that one lapses. I'm just going to wrap up now by going back to the presentation now. So we finished the practical demonstration. And in wrapping up, I just want to go through a few announcements about RDM support at the university. If you want to get more information about research data management, some of the things that we've covered over the past few weeks, the past 3 or 4 weeks, you can have a look at the Research Data Management Library Guide. You can also play the Research Data Management Adventure game. It does have a particular level that deals with the publication of research data. So you can actually, under fictitious assumptions, you publish a data set or submit it in a repository. It's a good way to actually make mistakes without actually having to face real consequences. Then we also do have support services here at the library. We have data stewardship services. As you've seen previously, I've indicated that we do review data management plans. We also manage research data within the context of the repository. We curate the data by appraising the data to make sure that everything's actually in order and that the quality of a data set meets certain standards. However, some of that heavy lifting also has to be done by the researcher, but we support researchers and students where we can. And we do have user support services such as consultations related to research data management, as well as related training sessions. And you happen to be here attending one of those training sessions. If you would like to contact the library's digital scholarship unit, those are the contact details. That's my email address, as well as Tobias. Tobias is my colleague who's here helping me host this session here at the library. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending this session. I'm sorry for keeping you past the time. If you would be so kind as to complete the summative assessment, Tobias has just shared the link. This will be specifically for this session. As I've indicated in all the previous sessions, we have these summative evaluations that we make use of so that we can actually gauge the degree to which the sessions have actually been successful. And we will be making use of certain charts to actually look at the progression of the attendees, that is, in terms of competency levels for each of these sessions and holistically for the entire RDM series. But the same principle applies to all of the sessions for this postgraduate student training program. Are there any sessions or comments? Perhaps I can look at the comments, the chat section, but let me just start off here physically. Are there any questions, comments, or anything like that? Okay, there's nothing here in the live audience in terms of any questions. If I have a look at the chat session, oh, I see that Sam had to dash. Mind you, the sessions are recorded, so you can actually watch the recording for this session as well as all the other previous sessions if you'd like to, in order to catch up. What we've covered today would make more sense after you've watched all that. There are about 8 sessions, I believe, about 9 hours worth of video footage. But if you can make time for any series that is on Netflix or anything like that, then surely you can watch RDM as a series. I hope that I won't be boring as you actually watch that. But if there are no questions, then let me not hold you hostage. I'd like to thank you for attending once again. Take time to complete the assessment and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.